My girlfriend said she needed a break, but instead of looking for herself, she went clubbing, and when she came back to me, I laughed in her face. It was a Sunday in late April when I first met her. I was trudging up a popular hiking trail just outside the city, the kind where you're as likely to encounter the sound of distant bird calls as the murmur of other hikers. I remember the smell of pine and damp earth, the crispness of the air. I'd gone alone, looking for some quiet after a particularly grueling week at work. She was coming down the trail with a group of friends, their laughter carrying ahead of them. But she wasn't laughing, she was smiling in this quiet, contented way, as if the world had delivered exactly what she needed that day. It was that smile that made me say something as we passed, something awkward, like how the weather was perfect for a hike. She stopped, turning to me, and said, "Isn't it just?" That's how we ended up talking for 10 minutes before her friends teased her for holding them up. She gave me her number, and the rest, as they say, is history. What drew me to her wasn't just her looks, though she was beautiful in a way that sneaked up on you. It was how simple she made everything seem. She found joy in the little things, a perfectly steeped cup of tea, a handwritten letter, a good book. She'd once described herself as quietly alive, and I'd never heard a better description. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to put on a performance. I could just be. Our first real date wasn't at a fancy restaurant or a trendy spot downtown. We went to a farmer's market and spent hours sampling honey and debating which bunch of flowers was prettiest. She chose the daisies, and I bought them for her. Later, we sat on a park bench and shared a peach so ripe it dripped down our fingers. It was easy to fall into a rhythm with her. We weren't flashy or grandiose, but we were solid. Every moment with her felt intentional, from the way she'd listen, really listen, to the way she'd scribble little notes, for me to find in my jacket pocket. For a long time, I thought we'd be this way forever. The next 2 years felt like living in a warm, perpetual embrace. She moved into my apartment, and suddenly it became a home, filled with her books, sketches, and records. Our lives revolved around simple joys, Sunday croissants, cooking dinner together, and thrifting for treasures like a chipped globe we'd spin, dreaming of far-off places. We talked late into the night, sharing pieces of our pasts and hopes for the future. Even our arguments felt constructive, always ending with her saying, "We're a team," and me affirming, "Yeah, we are." Spontaneous moments, like dancing in a summer storm, made life with her electric. It was the kind of partnership I thought would last forever. The changes began so gradually that I convinced myself they weren't there at all. At first, it was just little things. She'd linger at work longer than usual or scroll endlessly on her phone while I was talking. When I'd ask if she was okay, she'd brush it off with a tight smile. "Just tired," she'd say, or, "Work's been crazy." It was easy to believe her. I wanted to believe her, but the cracks kept widening. Our Sunday rituals, once sacred, began to slip. She'd suggest skipping the bakery or claimed she wasn't hungry. Even when we went, her eyes would wander, her responses clipped. The warmth that used to define her felt muted, like she was somewhere far away. Then there were the moments I couldn't ignore. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, the TV off, staring at her phone with an intensity I'd never seen. When I asked if everything was all right, she practically jumped, fumbling with her words before muttering, "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be?" She stopped asking about my day, her curiosity about the little things vanishing into thin air. Our late-night conversations, those intimate exchanges that had once felt like the backbone of our relationship, were replaced by silence. When I tried to revive them, she'd give distracted nods or tell me she was too tired to talk. I tried to counter the growing distance. I planned surprise date nights, booked a cabin for a weekend getaway, and even recreated our first hike. She participated, but something was missing. She'd laugh at my jokes, hold my hand, even kiss me, but it all felt hollow. Like she was playing a role she wasn't fully invested in anymore. One night, after another failed attempt at rekindling what we had, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, to demand an answer, but the fear of what she might say kept my mouth shut. I convinced myself that it was just a phase, that she'd come back to me eventually. We were a team, I reminded myself. We'd weathered every storm before, this one wouldn't be any different, but in the back of my mind, A small, persistent voice whispered the truth I wasn't ready to hear. Something fundamental had shifted between us, and I was powerless to stop it. It was a Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. I came home early, determined to make things better. I picked up her favorite wine and planned to cook dinner, hoping we could have a quiet night together and talk. But when I opened the door to our apartment, it was eerily silent. Her bag wasn't by the door, and her shoes were gone. I called out, "Hey, you home?" But there was no answer. A few minutes later, I heard the lock turn. She stepped in, her coat wet from the rain and her hair clinging to her face. She looked surprised to see me. "You're home early," she said, her tone neutral, almost distant. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "I thought we could have dinner together. I figured we could talk." Her eyes flicked to the wine on the counter, then back to me. She hesitated before replying. "I think we need to talk, too." I felt my stomach twist. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She took off her coat and sat at the table, her posture rigid. I sat across from her, waiting for her to start. The silence between us felt unbearable. Finally she said, "I've been feeling off. Like I don't know who I am anymore. I need some time to figure things out." "What does that mean?" I asked, leaning forward. "You're saying you want to leave?" She looked down, twisting her hands. "Not forever," she said. "Just for a little while. I think I need to go stay with my parents for a bit. I need to clear my head and figure out who I am outside of this." "Outside of what?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Us?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "It's not about you. It's about me. I need to do this for myself." The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating and heavy. "So you're just leaving?" "I'm not leaving you," she insisted. "I'm giving us space. It's better this way. We can't keep pretending everything's okay." I sat back in my chair, stunned. "What about us? What happens now?" She hesitated, then said, "We pause. Just for a little while. We're not breaking up, I promise. We just need to figure out who we are, on our own." I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but something about the way she looked at me made it clear her mind was made up. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "All right," I said. "If this is what you need." She left that night, her suitcase trailing behind her as she walked out the door. The apartment felt cavernous and empty without her. I told myself it was temporary, that she'd come back, but the ache in my chest told me otherwise. I sat in the dark for hours, replaying our conversation and wondering where everything had gone so wrong. She was gone, and I didn't know if I'd ever truly get her back. The first few days after she left felt surreal. I'd wake up in the half-light of dawn, reaching for her out of habit, only to find the other side of the bed cold and untouched. I told myself this was just a bump in the road. She needed time, and I would wait. That's what you do for someone you love. But then came the gaps, the moments when waiting turned into worrying. I sent her a text one evening, something simple. "Hope you're settling in okay. Let me know if you need anything." Hours passed with no reply. I reasoned that she was busy or just needed space. It wasn't until later that I checked her social media, a habit I tried to avoid, and saw her smiling in a photo taken that same night. She was at a bar with a group of people I didn't recognize, a cocktail in hand and her head thrown back in laughter. I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking. It wasn't just the image, it was the caption, "Here's to feeling free again." Free? The word felt like a betrayal. What was she trying to escape? Me? Us? I tried to push the thought away, rationalizing that she was reconnecting with herself, just like she'd said. But the more I looked at the photo, the harder it was to convince myself. The revelations didn't stop there. Over the next week, mutual friends reached out with polite concern, dropping hints that felt like daggers. "I ran into her the other night. She seemed different," one said cautiously. Another mentioned seeing her out at a club downtown. "She looked like she was having fun," they added, their voice tinged with discomfort. I couldn't stop myself from scrolling through her social media again. The photos painted a picture I couldn't reconcile. Her with friends I'd never met, her in dimly lit clubs, her at rooftop parties, holding drinks and laughing with people who now shared pieces of her life that I no longer did. The captions were carefree, almost defiant, living my best life, or sometimes you just have to let loose. Each image felt like another blow. This wasn't the woman who used to find joy in lazy Sundays or quiet conversations. This wasn't the person who found magic in simplicity. She was transforming into someone I didn't recognize, and I didn't know how to process it. I tried to stay rational. Maybe this was part of her journey, a way to rediscover herself. But late at night, when the apartment was dark and still, the doubts crept in. What if this wasn't about her finding herself? What if she was just leaving me behind? The final blow came when I drove past her parents' house one evening. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some small sign of her still being grounded, still being the person I knew. But her car wasn't in the driveway. The lights were off. She wasn't there. Later that night, I saw another post. She was out again, this time in a glittering dress, a neon-lit club as her backdrop. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." I sat in silence, staring at the screen. The meaning was clear. While I was holding on to the past, she was already moving on. It was late evening when she showed up at the apartment. No text, no call, just the sound of her suitcase wheels against the hallway floor, and then her knocking at the door. I opened it to find her standing there, looking unsure of herself for the first time in years. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Can I come in?" I didn't move for a moment, just stared at her, taking in the sight of her suitcase, her carefully composed expression. "Sure," I said eventually, stepping aside. She wheeled her bag in and stood awkwardly in the living room. The silence between us was palpable. I didn't offer her a seat, didn't ask how she was. Finally, she broke the tension. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "About us. About everything. I needed time to figure things out, and I think I finally have. Is that right?" I said, my voice flat. I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter, waiting for her to continue. She nodded, her hands fidgeting. "I realized I was lost, and I needed to find myself. But being away from you, it made me see how much I need you. How much I love you." I let out a short laugh before I could stop myself. It wasn't a chuckle or a polite, disbelieving sound. It was a sharp, bitter burst of laughter that filled the room. Her eyes widened in shock. "You love me?" I said, still laughing as I shook my head. "That's rich. You found yourself in nightclubs and rooftop parties, and now you want to come back here and act like none of it happened? It's not like that," she said quickly, her face flushed. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just needed to feel free, to figure out who I was." "Free?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Yeah, I saw how free you were. The photos, the posts. Living your best life, right? I was sitting here in this empty apartment, waiting for you to decide if I was still worth it, while you were out drinking and dancing like I didn't exist." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the familiar pang of guilt that used to come whenever she cried. I was too far gone for that. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way," she said, her voice breaking. I was lost. But I see now that what I really needed was you." I laughed again, harder this time, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. "You needed me? That's funny, because you didn't seem to need me when you were out there letting loose. You didn't think about me then, did you?" She flinched, her tears now spilling over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I made mistakes, but I want to fix this. I want us to be us again." I stared at her, the laughter fading as a strange calm settled over me. "There is no us," I said quietly. "Not anymore. You made sure of that when you left." "Please," she said, her voice desperate now. "We can fix this. We can start over." I shook my head, a hollow smile on my face. "You can't just put me on hold while you find yourself, and then come back when you're done partying. That's not how love works. You don't get to pick me up and drop me whenever it's convenient for you." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment she just stood there, defeated. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're done?" I nodded. "Yeah. We're done." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, grabbed her suitcase, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused and turned back to me. "I'm sorry," she said again. For everything. I didn't reply. I just watched her walk out the door and out of my life. As the door clicked shut, I let out one last laugh, a quiet, humorless sound. For weeks, I'd been waiting for this moment, imagining how it might go. And now that it was over, I realized something. I wasn't angry or heartbroken, I was free. Free in a way she never understood. Sometimes, losing someone isn't the end of the world. Sometimes, it's the start of finding yourself.